Wolf Theiss Soundshot. Insights and analysis from one of the leading law firms in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe.
Welcome to a new episode of the Wolf Theiss Soundshot. On July 14, 2021, the Governing Council of the European Central Bank decided to launch the investigation phase of a digital euro project, sparking interesting questions on the future of financial services. To explore what this would mean for our region, we invited Silvia Attanasio, Head of Innovation at ABI, the Italian Banking Association, and Petko Karamotchev, CEO of Industria Technology, to speak with us. Together with partner Richard Clegg from our Sofia office, they discussed distributed ledger technology in financial services and central bank digital currency solutions, as well as learnings and recommendations for commercial banks and member states.
Good afternoon. We're here today talking about how distributed ledger blockchain technology is being used in the financial services industry. And it's a very interesting week because on the 16th, the European Central Bank confirmed that it's going to be proceeding with the digital euro project. And I'm very pleased to have two guests who are directly involved in the implementation of blockchain projects and the policy discussions around central bank digital currencies. First of all, Petko Karamotchev, he's the CEO of Industria Technology, which is a blockchain development company based in London and in CEE. And he's doing a lot of work for central bank digital projects around the world. And secondly, Silvia Attanasio, who's the Head of Innovation for the Italian Banking Association, and first has been involved in lots of policy discussions around central bank digital currency, but most importantly, I think for this call, has also been leading the implementation and the development of the Spunta project in Italy, which I think is one of the largest blockchain applications within the banking industry within Europe. So thank you to both of you. It's really super to have the opportunity to talk to you both today. I think if it's okay just to start off talking about DLT in general, and maybe Petko to ask you, blockchain, lots of discussion around it, but what are the reasons, what are the advantages for using distributed ledger technology for the financial services industry compared to the centralized ledger, which has worked well for many years?
Good afternoon, Richard and Silvia. It's a big pleasure for me to be among this group today. So distributed ledger technologies, or the enterprise blockchain, is one of the the last modern and most innovative approaches in the finance industry. As a technical term, it's DLT is expanding chronologically ordered list of cryptographically signed binding and permanent transaction records shared by all participants. It also allows partakers or parties to trade financial assets back to their origin, which is beneficial for the traditional assets. It also allows two or more participants who don't know each other to safely interact in a digital environment and exchange value without an explicit need for a centralized authority. This is radically changing the asset operations and maintenance, the charging of obligations, the production cost reduction and optimization, the risk management, etc. The technology is forming financial services and markets by reducing complexity, improving the end-to-end processing speed, and thus the availability of assets and funds. It decreases the need for reconciliation. It even eliminates the needs of reconciliation across multiple record-keeping infrastructures. It increases transparency and unchangeability in transaction record keeping. It improves the network resilience through distributed data management and reduces operational and financial risk. It also helps the enhancement of market transparency if information contained on the ledger could be shared broadly with other participants like authorities and other shareholders. And it's generating intense interest for use in a variety of industries and domains ranging from banking, finance, insurances, and accounting. It can also be used in healthcare, legal, etc. Obviously, our topic for this discussion, central bank digital currencies.
And based on your experience, I think mainly with the UK banking sector, what sorts of projects have been focused on with the UK banks? Where are they taking as a blockchain technology?
We've been working together with Artery, which used to be previously the biggest banking consortium in the UK. Now it's one of the biggest enterprise distributed ledger firms. So the areas of interest that we have is primarily in kind of a banking, insurance. We also have projects in capital markets and supply chain and trade finance, where we see a lot of adoption of DDLT.
And Silvia, I think turning to you, so lots of people have looked at your experience, so particularly with sort of Spunter, and I think as head of innovation for the Italian Banking Association, you've really had a front seat role in helping and advising sort of the Italian banks around as a blockchain. Maybe just to ask you, what's the current position for the sort of Italian banks, and where are they on this sort of journey?
Yes, thank you, Richard, and thank you also for inviting me. This project led the Italian banking sector to be really an explorer, let me say, of this technology. Now, after a project started 4 years ago, we have 100 banks that use daily the DLT-based process instead of the traditional one. So they switched off their previous systems, and they used to daily have access to their own node to match and verify their reciprocal position using a DLT based application. We processed more or less 450 million transactions from the day we've gone into production. And this experience has been so teachable for us, as it was so important for the banking industry to really understand the shift of paradigm bring into with this technology, because we use Corda Enterprise. So we are talking about a private permission distributed ledger technology, which is something quite different from a permissionless technology, from a permissionless blockchain. So we can say a sort of different technology, to be honest, because it is a sort of mix of centralized component for the permission services and distributed components for the share and the distribution of the ledger. This enables both the security of knowing who you are transact with, and and the transparency related to the possibility to have access to the same ledger. So both counterparties are looking at the same version of the truth, the same version of the information. They can agree on a fact because they look at the same information. So we used this technology for the Spunta process, which is the reconciliation of interbank movements. So it is something related to bank exchanges, something quite technical and quite small in the overall banking sector. But it is important to consider that we started with this project when DLT was at the very, very beginning. In 2017, we were looking at the 0.9 version of Corda, the 1.0 of other comparable technology we was thinking of. So it has been a long journey in some way, because we experimented the complexity to challenge this young technology with the strong requirements that are related to a so regulated industry like the banking is.
And I'm interested, obviously, when we're doing these large IT projects, there's an awful lot of discussion around the scope, the liabilities, the sort of responsibilities of the various parties involved. You've obviously done well in bringing a large number of banks together, and not only working on the architecture and the process, but also actually pushing it forward with the project teams within the banks. And I'm very interested to learn and hear your experiences as to how you brought all of those different teams together in the same project to the same project plan.
Main lesson I've learned from this project is that a distributed technology implies and calls for a distributed governance. So it is really crucial to have around the same table people from the innovation department, from the back offices, from the payments department, the security, the legal. It is not so easy to segregate all these aspects related to the same project. So we needed to work together And considering all those departments multiplied by 18 banks that worked with us for the project, we are the association, and we worked with ABI, which is a non-profit center of research and development. So we didn't have a product to be sold, but we just need to reshape together in a distributed manner a process that was quite old and required to be updated, of course. So we met each other monthly, involving 60 to 70 people on each meeting. I can remember a meeting where we distributed red and green palette, supporting banks in voting for so many decisions. Do you want this label to be yellow or green? Red and green and voted. Do you want the threshold to be 25,000 or 30,000? Voting. And we decided together, because otherwise, why should we use a distributed technology? This has been the first part. But for example, we also discussed and changed and rephrased together the contract. All the banks that are using the same application, but not a version or an installation or a personalization of the same application, they are literally using the same code, the same application. They have to sign the same contract, identical, without personalizing it in any way. So we discussed the contract together with the legal department of the banks. We read it many times together. And finally, we decide the latest version of the contract. And they signed, 100 banks signed the same contract. So the main effort is to discuss and to find the solution together. And then when we found the solution that can be acceptable for all the involved parties, we went into production, into signing, into concluding the phase, let me say.
At the start of this, I just mentioned that the sort of European Central Bank had announced it will proceed with the digital euro. And I think we'll come back just in a sort of moment about your advice to the ECB as to how that process might be run. But I think it's quite a nice segue to the digital euro. And obviously, there's lots happening, not only in Europe, but elsewhere. And the Fed, the ECB, and others are looking at sort of central banks of digital currencies and trying to assess what's the value, what are the advantages. I think, Petko, you've been talking to a number of governments and a number of banking associations, not only within Europe, but in the Middle East and elsewhere. And it'd be interesting to get your thoughts as to what are the drivers, what are the issues pushing governments to think about sort of central banks of digital currencies.
Thanks for the question, Richard. We have a sort of at Industria, we have a unique approach towards working with central banks on central bank digital currencies. We have a fantastic relationship in the Arab world with the Union of Arab Banks, which is a consortium of more than 360 central and commercial banks. Our approach is kind of a much less focus on what we call the driving theory test. So most of the central banks currently are producing an enormous amount of white papers, not just central banks, but various industry players are producing a kind of a driver theory test while we focus on full practical tests. So we're using a sandbox for digital currencies from R3 and building on top of it into a kind of creating a practical implementation of a central bank digital currency. By this, we're doing a much more hands-on approach that leads to experimentation. We kind of represent most of the goal-life functions that ultimately the banks will see when they go into production. We also support the central bank to be able to formulate their a central bank digital currency strategy by using a kind of a hands-on approach. We help them build our first phase is capacity building and policy design support. So we kind of demonstrate the real concepts of the central bank digital currency sandbox. We also, at the later stage, we explore more technical challenges by helping central banks design their policies and governance implications with a group of commercial banks and financial market infrastructure companies. At the later stage, we help them with the customization. Now, what's interesting is the important impact of the CDBC. So we help central banks understand what is the impact on payments, what are the benefits of the central bank digital currencies could provide for payments. Also, we help them understand the impact on monitoring, financial stability, the functionality and provision for CDBC. And of course, as a technological vendor, we help them kind of understand the technology that would be the most appropriate to power such a transformation, including KYC and anti-money laundering compliance.
It's been interesting reading the ECB policy and as a research around the digital euro. And obviously, whenever people start talking about sort of central bank digital currencies, one of the concerns is always what's the impact upon sort of commercial banking. And Silvia, obviously part of the association, you have sort of contributed to that policy debate. It'd be interesting to hear both your view on the sort of digital euro and those of the association.
Have already read in documentation published last week by the ECB, we think that the debate would be very active and open to a lot of voices through European economics and also to citizens and customers. So, of course, any way designed, the digital euro will deeply affect customers and payment services, processes, and ICT solutions of the payment service providers. So it would be very important to cooperate to assess the potential effects of the different choices that ECB would take in the next 24 months to ensure that the impact is carefully assessed, not to displace and to distress the innovation set up by the banks and the PSPs on the market. But at the same time, I think that too often the current scenario is compared with another one, just adding the digital euro as another brick on an immobile scenario. Recently, last April, Fabio Panetta said more attention should be paid to the stability risks if the ECB does not offer a digital currency. This means that there is a price in not acting, and this price could be very high in this case, I think. Programmable money and DLT, in my opinion, are here to stay. So probably this is the time to sit all around a table and contribute to the final design of a digital euro. Of course, we need to be aware of the possible impacts that decisions have on the payment industry, on the credit industry, and on the distribution models. And these risks must be very careful managed, but this is not good reason to stop research and activities. And I'm sure the ECB will drive the change in the next 2 years very, very carefully.
Do the sort of commercial banks who are your members see more of the sort of opportunity in the sort of central bank digital currency rather than threat?
As every family, we have the cautious and the braves that share their opinion on in discussion. I think we are all conscious that if we don't do anything, more unconscious initiatives will come to the market. So it is important that someone that have strong comprehension of all the impacts on the industry, on the market, on the economics in general, would be ready to act before private actors or foreign actors that could not have the same attention and the same care on the impact on the financial industry.
Petko, for the technicals, so in the ECB review of its studies, there's a number of, I would say, sort of technical aspects coming out. And one is the link of privacy versus anti-money laundering. The second is cyber sort of security, making sure that, of course, payments and especially offline payments are properly sort of secured. And then finally, one thing to highlight with you is the ECB is considering a sort of combination between the sort of traditional ledger versus a sort of distributed ledger. Obviously, not to delve into the detail here, but from your conversations with other banks looking at sort of central bank sort of digital currency, how are they looking at these sorts of issues, and what is your advice on that?
It will be very interesting to kind of see the world from the lens of the ECB. Obviously, the world is much more colorful, much more complex. ECB is dealing with just a single currency, but a lot of stakeholders. I was kind of very happy to understand, and I'll also quote Fabio Panetta it's like obviously he shared that ECB has already tested mechanisms to separate identities from payment details, as well as offline payments for kind of a small amounts in which data is recorded only in the wallets of the sender and the receiver, which is a very, very, very interesting design. So as a technology developer, we normally, when we speak central bank digital currencies, we kind of split to black and white, like wholesale or retail. What we see with ECB is kind of a more in the middle, more a kind of a balanced approach. So it's very likely that we're going to see a hybrid approach, especially when we're dealing with privacy. So probably for transfers up to say €100, such transfers could be done using say Bluetooth. For such small amounts, we will permit really anonymous payments, but in general, confidentiality and privacy will be different from pure anonymity. So my guess is that we're going to see a kind of a very interesting hybrid approach in between, kind of for small payments, full anonymity, but for a kind of a bigger payments, we're going to see a ladder, a KYC and AML ladder. So it's going to be an interesting process in the next 2 years to see.
And then maybe, Silvia, the sort of final word from you. We talked about Spunter and the number of meetings and banks and voting cards. Obviously, the digital euro is a phenomenally complex project with lots of stakeholders. How is the Italian banks starting to sort of prepare for this?
Yes, we started from the end of the story because we don't want, of course, to push or to interpret the decision that the ECB would take in the next month. So we started imagining that the digital euro were already there, as if the ECB has already decided to issue it. And the question for us as market actors was which kind of value added services we were able to deploy and to provide to our customers only if a programmable digital money would be available. And so we started developing 4 use cases in order to cope with the complexity and to leverage on the opportunity that a programmable money would deploy on the market. And so we experiment and developed 4 demos. It requires only 2 months. This is another thing that is quite interesting. Of course, they are just demos, so very, very simple to be developed, but this new technology brings to us a big simplicity, a composability, a replicability of some dynamics. So it is really an opportunity to simplify something that in the traditional world is so complex. Of course, we are Europe, we are the land of complexity. This is absolutely true, and I want to pick up a word from the previous comment by Petko that I really share, which is hybrid. There are so many trade-offs on the ground that need to be balanced by the ECB, and probably the best way to solve each of these trade-offs would be to find an hybrid, centralized or distributed. Probably some components centralized, some other component distributed. Retail or wholesale. Probably some component retail and some other would enable the wholesale. Anonymous or totally private. I think we are, again, the land of GDPR, so we are able to manage personal data in a safe way. So we are able to protect and to preserve personal data. But in some case, in some kind of transaction, probably citizen would prefer anonymity, and we will find a sort of hybrid again solution that will cope with the desire of citizen together with a very complex AML and CFT regulatory framework. So this is the challenge for the next 2 years, in my opinion, to solve the number of trade-offs we have around us with an hybrid.
Wonderful. Both of you, thank you so much. I think we're living through a sort of privileged time when we start sort of discussing what is money and how money operates in the system. And the fact that you're both at the coalface, so to speak, and you've been able to come and talk to us today and just give us the highlights for the start of this journey is very much appreciated. So thank you very much indeed. And I hope everybody listening has found it as sort of fascinating as I have. So thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Wolf Theiss Soundshot. For more information, you can contact us via email at soundshot@wolftheiss.com or visit our website at www.wolftheiss.com. You can also follow us here to receive further updates on developments in law and business from one of the leading law firms in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe.